All right, hello, Arrow's senior living residents and viewers. My name is Dr. Daisy Allstone, and I'm a folklorist. I have a Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Oregon and a Master of Arts degree from Utah State University, both in folklore, and recently graduated with a PhD from Ohio State University in comparative studies. Today, I've been invited by Austin and Katarina to present a lecture on werewolves. While werewolves are not my primary area of interest in the study of folklore, I am quite familiar with contemporary legends, and especially those that involve what are commonly referred to as cryptids, beings with contested existence, kind of like Bigfoot, Mothman, or a Loch Ness Monster. And since this is the case, I consulted a friend and colleague, Dr. Harold Bostic, who is presently an adjunct instructor at Indiana State University in the Department of English, whose entire dissertation covered the subject of werewolves in everyday life. So, through significant research on my own, as well as a consultation with a werewolf expert, I'm excited and ready to share what I've learned with you today and hope that you're going to learn something new about werewolves. Oh, and the last note just before we jump into the discussion flow for today's lecture. I had to make sure that this lecture took place on the full moon, so be sure to look outside tonight and listen into the darkness because it will be the perfect night for werewolf hunting. So let's dive in. So, since we'll only have time to just dip our toes into the study of werewolves today, I chose a few major werewolf themes and ideas that scholars and the general public have found meaningful about these hybrid creatures to explore. So, here's the general flow for the presentation today. So first, I said my background is in folklore. We're going to talk a little bit about what folklore is, or the study of folklore, and how that contextualizes the werewolf. We're going to talk about what a werewolf is and a little bit about hybrid beings. What the heck is with the moon, right? We're going to talk about what the relationship between the werewolf and the moon are. We're also going to talk about the relationship between the werewolf and the silver bullet, thinking a little bit about being a werewolf as a kind of punishment or persecution or curse. And then we're going to talk about something I'm really excited about, that being werewolf versus dog man. And if you've never heard of dog man, we'll get to that in a second. If you have, this is really exciting. And then we're just going to recap and have some concluding thoughts about the many meanings of werewolves in pop culture and just in culture and everyday life today. So, what is folklore and how does it contextualize the werewolf? The study of folklore is most simply described as traditional, informal culture. This is a this is a definition coined by Dr. Lynn McNeil, and it evokes some of the important features of folklore. It's the study of things that are traditional, that is to say, passed down over time,
Oh,
by
no,
usually by person or in small groups.
I didn't have endurance.
Usually by person or in small groups. It's typically informal, meaning that you didn't learn how to do this thing from an institutional authority like the government or a teacher. You probably learned it from friends, family, or an affinity group that you're part of. And it's cultural, meaning that it has something to do with the communities that you're connected to. Some examples might be helpful here. Yes, the study of folklore does include things like fairy tales, historical costumes and regalia, folk music and banjos, quilts and fiber arts, but it also includes things like memes and urban legends and cooking and festivals and holidays. All of these are parts of our cultural lives that we share with people around us in our everyday life. Personally, I think of folklore as the study of relational creativity in everyday life. It's the creative or artistic expressions that communicate something to our communities about our values and beliefs. And werewolf legends, as you'll learn today, are certainly part of this idea of folklore, communicating a set of values and beliefs that we have about the world as represented through the stories that we tell about werewolves. So, because I'm a folklorist and much of the content widely available about werewolves comes from media and literature studies, my goal is not to rehash werewolves in pop culture and film today. It will come up a little bit. But rather, I'd like to shine a little light on the ways that the concept of the werewolf has moved throughout time and how the ways that we talk about werewolves in our everyday lives are shaped not only by popular media, but also by the context in which they arise in daily life over time. So first, what is a werewolf? So to me, werewolves are typically understood as a half human, half wolf being capable of transforming from one to the other in part or in whole on a ritual basis. What most people know about werewolves comes largely from the influence of pop culture and from media and literature scholars. There's less of a focus on the ways that these stories unfold over time and how they play out in everyday life outside of their depictions in books and film. For example, more historical or folkloric depictions of the human wolf hybrid tend to involve a transformation of the entire human body into an entire wolf body, large and ferocious. But in pop culture, and in film and television especially, it's much more common to see a werewolf depicted with a wolf upper half and a human bipedal or two-legged lower half. And that probably mostly has to do with filming logistics. It's a lot easier to have an actor walk on 2 feet dressed up as a wolf rather than transform their entire body on screen into a quadrupedal wolf. But this distinction holds true later as well when we talk about werewolves versus dogmen, a spot that opens up a larger discussion about the informal stories and encounters people have with human wolf hybrids today in their lives outside of the fiction that we all often see werewolves represented in. But first, before we get into that relationship again between the idea of what a werewolf is and how that blends our kind of fictionalized representations versus the folkloric representations, we're just going to look at some inspiration for the werewolf and the idea of a hybrid human wolf. So, this notion of a transformed human and non-human animal hybrid has been around since about 4500 BCE, which is what's referred to as Proto-Indo-Europe. You can see here one of the earliest known examples of what we might call today a shapeshifter or a therianthrope. It's a depiction of a human transformed into another animal, represented by a human body and an animal head. These two examples, one is a cave drawing and the other one is a kind of totem that was found inside a cave, are both from Europe. The cave drawing specifically is from Lascaux Cave in cave network in southwestern France and was completed about 21 to 14,000 years ago. This drawing is widely interpreted as depicting a bird-headed human figure being charged by a bison that it has wounded with a spear. Another object depicted in this scene is possibly represents a spear thrower with a sculpted representation of a bird at its head end, basically. The other item in this image is believed to be a totem, which was carved out of a mammoth ivory and represents a male human figure with a cave lion head. This was carved in the Andurician age about 40 to 39,000 years ago, and it was found in Holzensteinstadel Cave in southern Germany. You might also think of similar examples of this type of ancient hybrid being coming from the Egyptian pantheon, right? Where there's lots of gods that have mixed human and animal bodies. I wanted to start here just to get us thinking about the big picture of the role of hybrid humanoids in human evolution. They've been around from our earliest points of development as a species. These beings do not have, or have, these hybrid beings do not and never have existed in nature. It would not have been something observable to humans at any point in history to see a half human, half non-human animal in real life. This opens up some interesting questions about the evolution of the brain's capacity for imagination, creativity, and belief. While while this is not specifically a werewolf in this example, and we're not 100% certain of the artwork's use in their historical contexts, these creations show us that half human, half non-human hybrid creatures are somewhat of a foundational part of human culture and our capacity for storytelling, being able to form ideas about things that are not readily observable to us in our natural environment. There's no evidence of werewolves described this early in human history. That comes a little bit later, though, with the Greeks. So the Greek myth of Lycan is often considered the first werewolf, which is a label retroactively applied to this figure's wolfish transformation. So Lycan was a king of Arcadia who killed and cooked his son Nyctimus and served him up on a platter to none other than the god Zeus. He did this as a test to see if Zeus was really all-knowing and could recognize human flesh in a cooked or transformed form. He, of course, could because he's a god, and he recognized that Lycan's treacherous attempt was to trick him, and he was so disgusted by him murdering his own son and serving it to him that Zeus turned Lycan into a wolf, and his son Nyctimus was returned to life. So, despite this myth, however, Lycan was remembered as a kind of cultural hero, and he was believed to have founded the city of Lycosura, to have established the cult of Zeus Lycius, and start a tradition of the Lycian Games. So, the first kind of example of a werewolf is a curse given by a god, and I think that that's important and comes up in later iterations. So the idea of a human wolf hybrid was also present later on in the Middle Ages. So this is kind of persisted and built upon over time. For example, here, the encounters of werewolves of Ossory, which is a kingdom of medieval Ireland, were frequently reported and were said to be descendants of a legendary figure named Lagnach Felaid, who would go wolfing, which just meant that he would go out hunting as a wolf. There are sort of stories of him being a kind of wolf shapeshifter, and that his descendants were said to have the same ability. Or if a hunter would come up and would be said to have sort of wolf-like abilities, they might say that they were a descendant of Phalid and vice versa. So the wolves in Ireland are long extinct, but the stories told about our relationship with wolves and becoming wolves and hunting and sort of trading off in this ability can kind of represent a long-standing relationship with wolves in general and their overall literal and symbolic importance in life in medieval Ireland. Gerald of Wales tells one of the most widely read stories of the werewolves of Ossory. Essentially, this story was written down and is cited time and time again as one of the core examples of this type of encounter in medieval Ireland. So essentially, the story goes that a priest encounters a talking wolf who explains his lycanthropic affliction that affects him and his wife. And he asks the priest to lift this curse. And the wolf claims to be cursed to live as a werewolf because of the misdeeds of his own ancestors. Thinking back to the Lycan myth, he keeps this idea of a curse in mind for keep this idea of a curse in mind for further discussion. I just am thinking about whether or not it's an honor or a curse or a burden to bear the transformation into a wolf. So this is one of the most common stories. So next up, we were thinking about the setting stage for what a werewolf actually is and how we've come to kind of think about this relationship between humans and wolves over time or hybrid creatures over time. There are some really specific examples of or elements of stories about werewolves that solidify a lot later throughout time. And one of them is the relationship with the moon. So as a folklorist, to me, the full moon makes me think about cycles and rituals. The moon becomes full periodically on a monthly cycle, and the idea of the werewolf's transformation being somehow linked to the lunar cycle, to me, it seems like it's about the power of change and harnessing that power under certain conditions. So, a ritual, right? So, how do we harness that power under certain conditions? We might perform a ritual. So, a ritual is a serious subject of inquiry for folklorists, anthropologists, theologians, and the like, and can essentially be boiled down to a repeated, structured sequence of actions or behaviors that alter the internal or external state of an individual, group, or environment. So rituals are a way to add structure and guide transformations, whether that transformation is happening inside you or you want it to happen outside of you to someone else or through the seasons, something like that. For werewolves, their transformation ritual is necessary to involve the moon sometimes, but that is something that's grown and changed throughout time. So, the next couple examples that I'm going to share with you are ways that we can look at how the moon has ended up in the werewolf story as a facilitator or participant in the ritual transformation. The Satirical Liber, or in English, the Book of Satyr-like Adventures, has a short story about a werewolf that's in part connected to a lunar ritual. This text was written by Gaius Petronius, a comedic Roman author in the first century AD. Essentially, the story goes that the narrator was out drinking with a friend and on their way home entered a graveyard. His friend removes his clothes, performs a ritual, and then turns into a werewolf and frightens the narrator, running off into the night underneath a bright moon. The narrator returns to a woman that he's courting, completely scared out of his mind, and this woman tells him that only moments before he returned, a wolf had decimated their sheep flock, and a slave that they had kept stabbed him through the neck with a spear before they ran off. When they went to go find the clothes of this werewolf friend later, all that was left that they could find was a pool of blood. This story is told today as a kind of campfire story and one that some of the earliest stories, and one of the earliest stories that describes a human wolf transformation that predates the medieval era, but also remember this is a work of fiction and it's considered to be part of a tradition of satirical and comedic literature written for entertainment. Note here specifically that the moon, the moon shone like high noon.
Hi guys.
Um, Note here specifically that the moon shone like high noon. It was not necessarily full, but it was especially bright. And it's not directly linked to the wolf transformation, but the act of transforming in general through ritual and witchcraft. In this case, crafting a ring of water around this person's recently removed clothes, which it says here in the story on screen. I'll let you decide if it's truly water or another kind of bodily fluid as the person gets naked to perform this ritual. But this is the earliest story I found by conducting some independent research online, but it wasn't too difficult to find. And I bring that up because it demonstrates how simple it can be to find some of the early tropes and motifs about werewolves in popular literature, and ones that may have been directly referenced in a lot of the popular media that we share today about werewolves. These ideas relate to, build on, and are retold time and time again in new ways throughout history while staying true to some of the core elements. This is what folklorists study. This movement of themes and stories that inform our understandings of culture over time, and specifically what stays the same and what changes. And this time we just happen to be looking at that by way of the werewolf. So here's another example of where the moon factors into the werewolf story. One of the primary texts a person might discover in their werewolf research is the Book of Werewolves, a late 1800s text, we're getting much more recent in history now, written by Sabine Baring-Gould. This text firmly establishes a connection between werewolf and the full moon specifically, as opposed to a bright moon, and chose to write down the stories of different origins about werewolves in this text. So while this is one of the earliest texts focused solely on the werewolf as a subject, the accuracy of these stories are dubious, and the stories included are significantly paraphrased. So this is a text that you could consider part true and part false, and you really can't figure out which is which. What is interesting to me here, though, is how the moon remains a consistent factor, but the nature of it changes. A full moon versus a bright moon would matter significantly to a transformative ritual. This demonstrates one of the many shifts in our narrative accounts of werewolves over time, and how the more recent literature on werewolves kind of concretizes the features that have become this relationship with the moon, and that is in no small part to the access that we've grown to develop in popular media from the 20th century onward. And speaking of, the last significant werewolf lunar transformation crystallizing event is from one of the earliest monster movies that got really popular. The Wolfman from 1941 was one of the first film adaptations of the werewolf moon connection, where it becomes a central aspect of the plot, with the full moon triggering the werewolf transformation specifically. In earlier depictions, the moon was involved in shape-shifting or a transformative ritual in general, but it was only specifically applied to the human werewolf transformation in media since the 19th century, which includes the text that we just saw earlier. So this film's success, along with the Book of Werewolves, firmly establishes a werewolf trope in popular media that we consume today, like Teen Wolf, right? So some of these themes, especially the lunar connection. Some of these tropes are subverted and played around with to keep entertainment fresh. They're not always the same, but just like we saw with written fiction, the moon will be there and it will somehow assist the werewolf transformation, but the circumstances will change to facilitate a more memorable story. These popular tales and depictions of werewolves become part of the stories that we tell about them more informally. They create a set of elements a storyteller can pull on to make their audience think, oh, I wonder if that's a werewolf, before it's even confirmed. It can kind of foreshadow a werewolf. This movement becomes more and more solidified in the fictional depictions that make it into books and on screen. But just like we saw with the early cave art, this idea of half humans and half non-human animals is potent and it's shaped by the stories that we consume. So there's already a set of stories that we have about what werewolves are, where they come from, and there's ideas that come to us from different directions about animal or human and non-human animal hybrids, but they all kind of intermix and talk to each other and sort of form what comes up to the surface as the stuff that stays the same and the stuff that changes over time about the werewolf story. So another trope of the werewolf, but rather than about like life and transformation into werewolf is one that's more linked to death, is the silver bullet. As you'll see, this could be linked to another kind of ritual magic, sympathetic magic in particular, which I'll talk about what that is in a minute. But there are really two main sources for this connection between werewolves and their death as a result of silver weapons. So the first is the French Beast of Gévaudan or the Beast of Dawn. This is an example of a werewolf-type creature born from folklore. That is, it's not from a literary text, but rather repeated first-hand accounts of an encounter with a beast similar to a wolf, but much larger, possibly including bird-like talons and a lion tail. But the Beast of Dawn rampaged between 1764 and 1767 in the mountains of south central France. The Kingdom of France was actually so concerned with these reports about the ongoing and brutal attacks from this unnatural animal that nobles sought out and killed the beast, suspected to be the Beast of Dawn. But there's no true confirmation that the beast itself was the true perpetrator of this violence, or that the true beast was the one that was actually killed that sort of ended. There's sort of just murders that stopped happening. Many of the hunters seeking to kill the beast reportedly used silver bullets, or rather, crucifixes that were made of silver melted down into bullets. These silver bullets purportedly didn't work. But the lingering relationship between specialized equipment for hunting supernatural beasts persists, in part due to the magical associations of the act. Sympathetic magic, as I mentioned earlier, is a kind of ritualized magic performed using objects or actions that resemble or are symbolically associated with the event or person that we hope to influence by doing the magical act. So, for example, it was important in this instance that the silver bullet was made from a melted down and repurposed crucifix, which was intended to give it a kind of religious potency against a sort of demon manifest as werewolf. A detail that has since been dropped by those writing new werewolf fictions today, but an idea that's still called in throughout the folkloric retelling over time. The second earliest association that we have between silver and werewolf death comes to us from the historical connection between witches and witch hunts and werewolves. Give me just a moment for some water. My werewolf expert, Dr. Harold Bostic, informed me that, quote, werewolf trials were a legal performance that reinforced connections between werewolves, witches, and demons. Texts like the Malleus Maleficarum by Henricus Insortus and Jacobus Springer and Demonology by King James VI described werewolf transformations that resulted from humans hallucinating them from the influence of spells of witches and demons. Witches were also accused during this time of riding wolves, And there's also this sort of cultural idea that women or witches were able to transform into cats and men could transform into wolves. So there's a little bit of that there too. All of which is leading into the perception of werewolves as possessing a kind of demonic or witch-like quality that comes from this ability to transform being seen as supernatural or a special kind of power that one obtains. And this was even made stronger by the subsequent set of werewolf trials that were very similar to witch trials, in which um, people were sought or tried for being a werewolf themselves. So, one of the most important cases is the 1589 case of Peter Stub, the werewolf of Bredberg in Germany. Stube was tried and convicted of murdering a bunch of people and reportedly admitted in court to using wolf skins given to him by the devil to transform into a wolf to commit these crimes, which was sort of why he was able to escape justice for so long. So there is a direct relationship with the devil in the retelling of the story that afforded the werewolf transformation. So whether or not this story is true or we believe Peter Stobe about this devil relationship and this sort of curse or granted magical ability, it still became part of the popular legend about how werewolves come to be in that day, and so it continues on. But the witchy connection specifically to silver bullets echoes an idea that killing a witch with a melted crucifix or some kind of bullet with a special or magically potent metal like silver would have the effect of sympathetically transferring the power of God to cast out the demon or the devil inside of them through the metal. So it's not so much the bullet itself is the weapon, but rather the power of God to excise a demon. So this notion made its way into a few moments of werewolf legends over time as well. And you can see where like there is a very similar or understandable, recognizable pattern of the power of the bullet doing harm, but that power is given from different directions depending on the context in which the story is being told. So ultimately, however, again, the silver weapon specifically wasn't completely popularized in werewolf stories until the 20th century when werewolf popular media took off. So again, The Wolfman from 1941 is largely where this notion of werewolves being killed by a silver weapon became a popular trope. In this movie, the climax of the killing of the werewolf happens when Wolfman is clubbed over the head with a silver-tipped cane of the protagonist. So it's not a bullet, rather a silver-tipped cane. Another theme that emerges from this trope is that the werewolf is to be persecuted for its instincts. This idea circles back to one of our original examples of Lycan and Zeus, in which becoming a werewolf is seen as a curse or a punishment, and it's meant to make the afflicted suffer. Whether the curse, whether cursed or afflicted with an uncontrollable carnivorous nature, becoming a werewolf in many instances is not really something to wish for. The werewolf affliction comes with the price of persecution, and today that trope is reflected in its association with silver bullets. So, a last kind of big final point that I want to bring around to thinking about werewolves in popular media today, or just in our lives in general today, is the werewolf versus dogman. So, this is an area that I personally find myself a bit more comfortable in because we're talking about that blurry line between something we might call a shapeshifter and something we might call a cryptid. So, as we established, one of the key elements of the werewolf is its ability to shapeshift through some kind of ritualistic event. Whether the moon or a curse, there is an event that is necessary for the transformation from human to wolf or human wolf hybrid to take place. Often, the stories of werewolf transformations, as well, specifically come from regions in Europe and have migrated over to the US through popular culture. and through history and the way that we tell stories about where we come from. Although there are some notable examples in the United States, like the Rougarou in the American South and the Loup-garou in Canada, although you can see that by the French, those still have roots in European folklore. And this is distinctly different from what you may have heard about a creature called the Dog Man. The Dog Man is a kind of cryptid, an animal with contested existence like Sasquatch or Mothman. And Dogman legends are primarily from more rural areas of the United States and essentially describe various first-person encounters with a human-dog hybrid creature today. They often walk on two legs and are covered in hair and have a dog head and a sour attitude. There's also a strong narrative tradition within many Native American communities about encounters with dogmen, namely the Ottawa. Most famous dogman encounters are that of the Beast of Bray Road in Wisconsin, the Michigan Dogman, and the Beast of LDL, which is like the area between the Great Lakes. And beyond some of the physical similarities, however, these creatures are not referred to as wolves or werewolves and are um, largely part of that is because dogmen are not transformers. They are dogmen 100% of the time and do not transform into dog via a ritual. They just are dogman. There's no need for a transformation to happen. They're more often a blended mix of human and dog features and are more common in North American legends than anywhere else. However, this is a kind of similar depiction. We're sort of circling back in time again to how the Beast of Dawn in France was depicted as a sort of a giant beast of encounter. So maybe the Beast of Dawn was more like a dog man than a werewolf, and the language that we use to describe them gets a little bit tricky, right? So part of where the crossover between werewolves and dogmen come into play is that besides their human canine hybridity comes down to the interplay between belief and popular culture. It highlights the ways that pop culture and what I would call folklore interact and influence each other. There's a reason that some of the tropes about werewolves show up in modern day encounters with dogmen and vice versa. Werewolves can be some kind of cryptid because of their relationship to belief. In fictional texts and pop culture, it's understood that these creatures are fiction. Like when you watch The Wolf Man, you don't necessarily believe the Wolf Man is out there. It also helps that he dies at the end of the film. You kind of believe that that's a story, and you're not looking around your shoulder for a Wolf Man to come get you. But the first person encounters with werewolves today might happen because of the ways the term werewolf has become a standard for a human dog-like creature. So the terminology that we use for unexplainable encounters and events comes from the communities that we're part of, the traditions we're raised with, and the media that we consume. So if we encounter what I might call a dog man in the Great Lakes region or with Great Lakes locals, but we're from New Mexico, we might be more likely to call it a werewolf just because of our associations that we have with that kind of creature. Or we might even call it a chupacabra, which is a cryptid for another discussion. But this negotiation of belief that's at play in retelling a story of an encounter with a human and non-human animal hybrid is part of the potency of the legend's legacy. Stories continue to be told the more that you can debate their potential truth. So whether you're encountering a dog man and you call it a werewolf or a werewolf that you call a dog man, these are all kind of part of the same reflective nature of the stories that are where that popular media has influenced about human dog, human wolf hybrid kind of beings. So again, the werewolf and the dogman are both part of this long-standing tradition in human history of hybrid human wolf beings. The main aspects of the stories involving what we call werewolves today are highly contextual, and they take shape in part from the influence of popular culture and also from the stories and traditions shared within particular communities about how to understand and engage with these more than human beings. So, just to kind of give a big overview of things that we touched on today and a sort of recap, The human wolf hybrid has been around since the earliest parts of written history, and the hybrid creatures in general have been around since the dawn of humanity, essentially. How we understand the werewolf today is shaped not only by our popular media, but also by the stories and representations and interpretations of the werewolf shared in daily life over time. The moon and the silver bullet connections to werewolves are a recent phenomenon solidified in media and literature from the 19th century onward. And regional stories influence our interpretations of first person encounters with werewolves. The werewolf as a symbolic figure in culture is not going away anytime soon. So, thank you so much for spending some time listening to this lecture today. If you'd like to contact me, I have listed my information here on screen, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you might have about werewolves, folklore, dogmen, and the like. Thank you.
Daisy, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool.
I see some claps. I see some chats saying thank you. Yes,
Thanks, all.
yeah, we can stay on for a few minutes for any questions.
Sure.
You know what? I will add there is a
Sure.
Legend Chasers t-shirt coming, guys. Stay tuned to your emails. We are releasing a werewolf version. Daisy's going to be receiving that too. So
Nice.
stay close for that one because that will be coming in your email today.
You got a question in chat. Do you ever cover Mothman? I wonder if that's that for me or for you. Kind of,
Maybe for me, but we have
yeah.
not, but I will add it to the list because we're always looking at different legends to
Well,
speak about.
I've got a Mothman person for you. I've got more than one Mothman persons for you if you want.
Oh, I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
Loch Ness, we did. Loch Ness Monster, we did. I think it was last year. Nathan, I will send you the link on our YouTube. That was a good one. But we love the ideas. Yeah, if you guys have any ideas on Legend Chasers, like send them our way.
Hey Daisy, this is Austin. I just first wanted to
Hey.
say thank you so much for joining us today. This was absolutely amazing. But
Yay.
also,
Yeah.
for anybody that might be interested in possibly pursuing future knowledge and just keeping up with this, do you have any suggestions on how they might do that?
For werewolves specifically,
Sure.
or
I think
just or like any or just
folklore
like this
generally.
subject, folklore in general.
Yeah.
Um, Well, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Of course, there's lots of great TV shows that have folklorists on as experts, and you can follow them across social media. Lynn McNeil is actually on a bunch of different television shows like Monster Hunters and was on what was it called? A Life as We Know It with, well, I don't know. I could if you reach out to me, I can give you some information about some of those shows. But I also do a sort of a podcast. It's kind of like a live TV show called Folkwise on Twitch, which is a platform that basically just provides public access TV via the internet. But I also have a YouTube channel by the same name, Folkwise, and on that channel we interview folklorists, artists, musicians, anybody who deals with creativity in everyday life. And we interview them for about an hour and talk about the research that they do. And we also play a video game with them that's thematically related to their research topic. But we just clip out their interviews and put those on our YouTube channel. So if you're ever interested in a specific area of the study of folklore that might not be werewolf related, but maybe is related to like festival or music or other legends or science or something like that, we have a ton of that information on our YouTube channel, which is again called Folkwise, Folkwise. And you can just find that by Googling it.
Thank you for that. Yes, that's
Yeah.
it's a great place to check out. I don't see any questions. I think we're good to wrap here.
Okay,
People know where
cool.
to find you and how to find your YouTube
Yep.
channel. Daisy, thank you once again. And guys, stay tuned for the Chasers t-shirt that's coming out today.
Awesome. Thank you all for listening.